The approach to Arcadia Planitia looked clean from orbit, a flat stretch of dust with faint tracks frozen into it. The outpost was a small cluster of shapes against the plain, the color of old ash. The last transmission sat in my buffer while the lander shook through descent. The message was 12 words. "We found a door. It answers. If anyone hears this..." Then a dead carrier. I did not say anything out loud. The autopilot killed thrust at 3 meters and settled us onto the surface with a short scrape through the skids. I let the dust fall before cycling the hatch. The suit readouts were nominal. Carbon dioxide scrubbers were at 94%, battery at full, comms locked to the relay orbiter. Light outside was the flat kind you get in mid-afternoon on Mars. Shadows with hard edges and no warmth in them. The outpost was 600 meters away. I could make out a mast, a squat cylinder, and a scatter of tilted panels. I stepped onto the ladder and tested the footing. Regolith pushed around my boot and held. I crossed the plane with the slow, efficient stride that training had burned into my muscles. The only sound was the suit fans and the slow ping of dust granules striking the ankles of the suit. A dust devil shifted along the horizon, thin and quiet. I kept my eyes on the outpost airlock and counted each marker stake on the way in. The exterior looked wrong in quiet, practical ways. A maintenance panel was open and frozen with dust caked around the edges. The mast had a kink a meter above the base where a micrometeor had scored the strut, and someone had repaired it with 2 bands of gray tape. The panels were at a winter angle, though it was not winter here. The airlock light was off. No blinking green, no welcome. I wrapped my glove against the outer hatch by habit. The knuckles gave a dull sound that my suit mic picked up and fed back into my ears. I tried my access key and then the backup mechanical lever. The door took a moment, then grudgingly rolled inward. The inner hatch was closed. The vestibule was clean. Someone had taken time to vacuum out the dust to keep the interior seals in shape. That meant care and intention, and it made the silence heavier. I cycled the inner door. The hab lights came on in a slow ripple from one end to the other. Power was alive. The fans were silent. The air tasted like aluminum and dry filters. There was a mild chemical note that sits in every new habitat. It did not smell like a place with people in it. I moved through with my suit sealed, boot heaters clicking in the soles once every few steps. The outpost had 3 connected modules: air, lab, and power. The bunks were still made. A mug was clipped to a rail near the galley window with a brown ring at the bottom. A chessboard was secured to the table with a half-played game on it, white to move. Someone had taped a strip of paper above the galley. Ration hot showers to 2 minutes. It was signed with a sloppy R in black marker. The water recycler hummed when I tapped the control. Systems were in idle. The network terminal in the lab woke to my admin key. The last sync was 11 days old. I opened the local logs and forced myself to read in order, not skip to the end. A robotics check by Shu. A soil sieve test by Tanaka. A sunset photo with a little joke in the caption from Ramos at Mission Control about Mars Golden Hour. Then a block of entries that tightened into one topic. VLF anomaly in Quadrant D. Metal content spike at 30 centimeters. GPR shows a regular seam. Resonant response to hammer taps. Installing canopy. A short clip of an audio file. 6 taps, 3 in reply. The lab's internal microphone picked up the sound through the regolith, and the steel tables shivered at a low frequency that my suit recorded as a faint line near the noise floor. I felt my jaw muscles tighten on their own. I scrolled. Door is real. It matches no known erosion profile. We are not alone in the literal geological sense. Then the final note from Shu, We will attempt controlled opening tomorrow. Protocol E19. If you are listening later, wait for us. The timestamp was 11 days ago. After that, a power glitch alert, then nothing. I downloaded everything to my suit and mirrored it to the lander when the relay orbiter crossed the sky. The link quality was clean. I gave mission a short packet. On site, outpost intact. No crew. Logs mention door at Quadrant D. Investigation in progress. The delay made the instant answer habit dissolve in my chest. The reply would come when physics allowed. I shut the terminal and walked to the tool locker. Protocol said to secure the habitat and await guidance. Protocol also said to locate crew if life support looked viable. Life support was viable. The crew was not here. I signed out a field kit, ground-penetrating radar sled, a sledge with a non-sparking head, a micro drill, a fiber optic scope, a small inflatable canopy with a clear front, 2 gas sampling tubes, and a meter of pressurized argon line. Everything went into the rover cradle on its charging berth. The rover showed 82% charge, good enough for a run and back. I watched the sky for a minute before I left. The outpost viewport framed a patch of dust and a line of panels. The outside was so still that the idea of an answer to a human knock felt like a story told to keep people awake on a long shift. I did not tell the story to myself. I cycled back through the airlock and went out to the rover. The rover rode low under the kit. The wheels cut shallow marks into the surface. I steered by landmarks and the nav overlay on my visor. Quadrant D lay past the main array, over a line of pressure-locked storage barrels, then out to a set of stakes with red pennants. A tarp glinted with dust frozen to the weave. Someone had tried to keep the site clean. Someone had hoped for repeatable data. The canopy was still staked over a shallow trench. The trench ran 2 meters across and a meter deep. The bottom was glassy with fused regolith, and a line ran through it that was not natural. It was too straight, too even, and it cut across the matrix with a rightness that felt machine-made. I lowered the radar sled and dragged it along the seam. The screen showed a hard return at a very thin layer, then void. Behind that, an arc of something shaped, a smooth curve of density measure that looked like a door laid on its side. I lifted the sledge and set down the heavy head very gently against the seam. I did not strike. I moved the head along the line until the handle vibrated differently under my gloves. The suit does not give you much tactile information, but some things come through in bones and joints. I marked the spot with chalk that looked foolish in this place. I stood still and listened to my own fans. Then I tapped. 6 taps. The habit of matching what the logs had captured felt smart, and also a little childish. I waited. The suit recorded a small tick from somewhere under the trench wall, too faint to be sound, more like a change in pressure against the handle of the sledge. The sled's VLF sensor drew a thin line on my visor. 3 small peaks, 6 and 3. My grip firmed involuntarily. Quadrant D site located, I said into the recorder. Seam is present, consistent with logs. Radar confirms cavity behind. Resonant response to taps recorded. Proceeding with canopy and gas capture. Saying the words settled something mechanical in me. Work has a shape and a sequence. I pulled the inflatable canopy over the trench and sealed the skirts against the ground with sandbags from the rover bin. I tied the argon line to the port and purged the canopy until the analyzer read 95% argon. Anything that vented from the seam would enter a controlled volume. I set the micro drill at an angle so the bit would cut across the seam rather than straight in. The bit was diamond and it chewed cautiously. Dust collected in the canopy air and made the light softer. The analyzer clicked and gave me numbers that made sense. Carbon dioxide from the Martian atmosphere being displaced by argon. A slight spike in nitrogen that did not belong. Then it settled. The bit hit something and skittered sideways. I pulled the bit while the suit software mapped the resistance curve. There was a material under the regolith that was not basalt and not metal, I knew. It was dense like stone, but bright on the radar like a clean metal. I tapped the drill body against it, and the canopy air shifted just enough that the analyzer picked up something unknown at parts per million. The name column went blank. My gloved finger hovered over the abort toggle. Mars air is thin. Anything you open here wants to rush one way or the other. If there was a cavity with pressure inside, it would vent until balance. If it was vacuum inside, it would pull the canopy in like a lung. The canopy did not move. The analyzer showed a very small pressure rise. Inside had a little more pressure than outside and was bleeding into the canopy slowly through the micro-drill channel. The sample tube captured the flow with a soft hiss. I clipped the first tube and started a second. The unknown component held steady. It had a mass above argon and below carbon dioxide. It had a faint magnetic response when I put the handheld coil near it. It smelled like nothing to my suit, because I could not smell through it, but my brain tried to assign a sense to the trace and came up empty. I told the recorder what the analyzer said, and tried not to embellish the words in my head. I widened the pilot hole by 1 millimeter. The drill bit made a different sound for 3 seconds, and then the canopy flexed inward with a slow pull that lifted the skirt and dropped it again. The pressure differential increased by a fraction of a kilopascal. The analyzer's unknown line rose and then stopped. The radar showed the curve behind the seam shift by an amount that the software called non-geological. I turned off the drill and let the canopy settle. I did not open anything further that day. The sun was moving toward the low angle that turns everything cold quickly. The rover battery wanted to be back on charge. I taped the canopy edges and left the argon flow at a whisper to keep the volume stable. I put a small camera on a stake and pointed it at the seam so it could watch for movement. Then I drove back to the outpost with the habit of glancing in mirrors, even though mirrors here only show you your own dust. In the hab, I shed the suit piece by piece and lined the seals with vacuum grease. The water recycler felt fine under my palm. I warmed a meal pouch without tasting it. I opened the crew quarters again and stood in the doorway and looked at the details for human presence. A sock rolled into a corner and caught under a vent. A hair caught on the edge of a locker shelf. A book with a paper marker 3/4 of the way in. A name patch, KI. I put it back where it was. I set the samples in the lab hood and fed the analyzer a protocol. It ran clean until the unknown component. The computer tried to match it against the onboard library and then the archive. It shrugged in the way a machine shrugs, with a blank line and a soft chime. I packaged a tiny aliquot into a sealed vial for return and logged exactly what I did, step by step, so another set of hands could do it again and tell me if I had fooled myself. The relay arc passed over and the base threw up a faint carrier tone. I sent a dump of the logs, the audio, the radar, and the analyzer traces. I added the note that no crew were present, and that no signs of a violent event were visible. I tagged the message with Protocol E19, and the note that I had not opened the seam beyond a pilot hole and gas capture. I asked for permission to proceed to controlled opening in 12 hours. Night at the outpost is not dark like Earth. The sky turns to a flat black and the stars blaze without twinkling. The panels creak as they cool. The habitat frame gives intermittent clicks as stress redistributes itself. The air inside hangs still and dry. I lay in a bunk in my underlayer with the suit in the rack beside me and the helmet near my shoulder. I kept one eye on the lab console where the analyzer showed the unknown line as a calm, steady point. The Hab clock ticked. I must have slept because I woke to the sound of a knock. 3 knocks. It was not a storybook knock. It was the sound of something resonating through the frame. I sat up without thinking and put a hand on the bulkhead. The bulkhead did not move. The knock came again from far away, and the number of knocks was 6. The half-manufactured part of my brain put that into the same bucket as we found a door. I got up and went into the lab. The camera at the site sent a silent stream of still frames once every 2 minutes. The last 5 frames were unchanged. The canopy was steady. The argon flow was steady. The analyzer readout for the gas sample in the lab case did not twitch. The sound did not come from the site. It came from the habitat itself. Thermal movement in a structure makes sounds that the human brain wants to label as intent. I stood and listened to the quiet a while until my shoulders loosened. Work starts again at dawn. Mission Control answered while the eastern horizon went gray. The message had the constrained wording that comes from review. Proceed with extreme caution. Confirm readiness of atmospheric capture, bioprotocol, and emergency sealant. Do not enter any cavity. Do not attempt direct exposure of suit to unknown gas. Transmit live during opening. It was signed by Ramos and 2 signatures I did not recognize. A second message added, "You are the only asset within 12 hours. We trust your judgment." That last sentence read like a hand on a shoulder. I did the checks in order and out loud. Canopy seals intact, argon supply topped, gas capture tubes primed, emergency sealant on belt, micro drill bits replaced, sledge at hand, camera live, VLF recorder on, radar sled ready, the rover battery read full. I wrote the plan on the lab whiteboard and took a photo of it and sent the photo to Mission. Then I suited up and went back out. The morning light made everything look a little newer. Frost had formed in thin skins on shaded rock. My boots broke it and left the ground a shade darker. The canopy sagged slightly under a new layer of dust. I brushed it off with the soft brush from the toolkit. The camera had recorded nothing interesting. The pilot hole had a tiny rim of ice around it, just at the edge of the seam. The analyzer sniffing the canopy volume told me the unknown component was still present in small amount. I extended the micro-drill trench in a shallow arc along the seam until I had 5 centimeters of exposure. The bit cut through the fused regolith and then traveled along a material that hissed when the drill dust hit it. I set the sledge head against the seam and leaned my weight in. The line flexed under my pressure just a fraction, then returned. The radar showed the curve behind bowing by a real amount measurable in millimeters. That meant an elastically supported object under tension. I set the sledge down and took the vibrohammer from the pack. It is a little machine that puts low-frequency tapping into whatever you press it against. The logs had 6 taps and 3 in reply. I set the hammer frequency low and tapped 6 pulses. The sledge head trembled in my hand after a moment with 3 faint responses. The curve behind shifted again. The canopy pressure bumped. The seam line went from dark to lighter gray as dust lifted along its length. "Proceeding to mechanical test," I said into the mic. First response repeats, attempting opening. I anchored the canopy edges with extra sandbags. I set the vibrohammer to continuous low beat and pressed it gently against the seam. The radar drew a line that bent and then slid. The analyzer clicked. The canopy bowed outward like a slow breath. The seam opened by the width of a fingernail over the 5 centimeters I had cut. Behind it was not rock. It was a smooth plane with tooling marks that were not terrestrial standard. I killed the hammer and froze. The canopy pressure rose by 0.5 kilopascal and held. The unknown gas stepped up like a ladder. The plane behind the seam moved with a small, certain increment and then stopped. It was a door. The word sat in my head exactly as it had been said on the recorded log. It was a door, and it was not ours. The plan said, "Do not enter." The plan said, "Sample, document, retreat." I keyed the fiber optic scope and slid it through the gap. The camera on the end showed a slot of darkness and then a shine where my own light hit a surface that did not scatter like rock. The surface was too clean, too even. The scope hit a second plane, this one at a shallow angle. The geometry made sense if you imagined a pressure door and an inner hatch offset from it. I withdrew the scope and set the camera to record through the gap. I slid 2 glass sample blades into the flow and pulled them back into the sealed cassettes. My hands wanted to shake. The suit made that impossible. Every motion was smoothed by joints and seals and structure. I reminded myself to breathe with a rhythm that fit voice work. Judges live off sequence and detail. Panic only makes noise. I tested the seam along another 5 centimeters. It moved with the same small progression. The pressure climbed and halted. The unknown component climbed and held. The vibrohammer transmitted energy and the door responded. The datasets wrote themselves into my visor, and I kept going until the seam was open enough for the camera to see a hint of interior. The interior was a corridor with planes and curves that were not decoration. They were function without ornament. The floor had no dust on it. I wanted to say a name for the makers. My head offered none that did not feel like a story, so I recorded details instead. The corridor sloped up a few degrees. The walls had a micro-texture of dimples arrayed in a grid that did not match any manufacturers I knew. The corners were radiused with a constant curve. The entire thing looked old and untouched. The unknown gas flowed with a steady line into the canopy. "Do not enter," the plan said again on my visor. I pushed the feeling of crossing a threshold down into a box where things can be looked at later. I backed out of the canopy, resealed the skirts, set the vibrohammer to a minimal pulse so the door would hold at this opened state, and marked the entire area with a bright orange barrier line. The rover looked small and friendly beside it. I drove back to the hab to think in a room with air. In the lab, the unknown gas refused to identify. It bonded with water weakly, and with oxygen not at all under the temperatures I could manage. It had mass, it had a magnetic quirk, and it slipped between the labels in a way that made the machine hesitate. I wrote everything down to the number of minutes I let each reaction sit. Doing the work forced the idea of the corridor into the background. It did not go away. Mission's next pass brought an instruction that was simple. Seal it. There was a second instruction that had a knot in it. Before you seal, search for any sign of crew at the door site. It meant the part of protocol that no one says out loud. Find bodies if there are bodies. Bring home tags. Bring any message. It was the decent thing. It was the heavy thing. I took a second rover run out with a narrow beam radio and a camera on a telescoping mast. I stood at the canopy edge and looked for footprints. The Martian surface keeps prints badly unless you step on crust. The trench had a dozen scuffs and 3 clean impressions. The impressions were long and narrow, the standard EVA boot here. The direction was into the canopy, not out. I ran the mast camera down and caught a reflection on the inner plane. It looked like a faceplate. I shut the vibrohammer off. The seam pulled itself closed by a millimeter. The canopy tugged inward. The pressure differential faded by a notch. I lifted the canopy edge and set the sledge head against the seam to keep it from closing entirely. Then I pushed my glove toward the gap and angled the scope. The reflection resolved into a helmet. A suit lay against the inner plane like a person had eased down to rest. The neck ring was intact. The visor was unbroken. The rest of the body was at an angle that looked like exhaustion. I did not see a face. "K," I said into the mic softly, without intending to. It was the name on the patch in the hab. The suit had numbers painted on the forearm, not a name. I made myself read the numbers and match them to the crew list. It matched Shu. My mind corrected itself. Shu was probably inside. K was somewhere else. The point was that someone had made it here, opened the door, and sat. Then the door had closed enough that the person could not be pulled out without cutting. No marks of struggle, no signs of a fall, just a barrier and a limit. I sent the photo to Mission with the tag that I would not force the door wider. The structural risk was too high without a full engineering team. The note came back 2 orbits later. Agreed. Do not enter. Leave beacon. Seal with reversible measures. I had a kit for that. It was meant for holes, not history, but the function was the same. By afternoon, I had covered the seam with a flexible composite strip and sealed it with adhesive and mechanical clamps that bit into the fused regolith layer. The vibrohammer went into the locker. The canopy stayed in place as a marker and a first layer of protection. I placed a beacon on the stake with a message for any person who might wander here in a decade. Hazard. Controlled site. Do not disturb. The words felt thin against the ground under them. Back in the hab, I made a recording to send with the next relay. Arcadia Outpost remains unoccupied. Evidence suggests at least one crew member at Quadrant D door site. Subject appears to be beyond the inner plane of the door, not recoverable with on-site tools without risk. Door is non-terrestrial construction. Gas sample taken shows unknown component at trace levels with mild magnetic response. All seals applied per reversible protocol. I am preparing to depart and leave Outpost in standby. Departure was simple and long. The lander needed checks that ran to pages. The Outpost lights stayed on until I pulled power to conserve the batteries. The habitat went dim, and then the emergency LEDs made a faint strip along the floor. I stood in the doorway and thanked the room in my head for not breaking under me. I left the chessboard as it was, white to move. Someone could come back and finish the line later. I climbed the ladder with care so my boots would not track fine dust into the cabin. The lander smelled like stale plastic and new wiring. The seat fit my shoulders in the way that machines do when you stop thinking about them. I ran the engines up to warm and watched the gauges open their eyes one by one. Outside, the Outpost was a low mound and a single mast. The sandbags at Quadrant D made a little ridge that will last until the wind erases it. I looked once more at the monitor. The canopy moved a fraction in the breeze made by thermal gradients. The clamps held. The seam was a line again. The corridor behind waited in the way that objects do. A door is an invitation, whether you want it to be or not. I said the word no under my breath and let the autopilot take the ascent when the minute came. The lander climbed over the plane, and the Outpost shrank into a dot, then the dot into a memory that sat behind my eyes. The planet turned from ground to world. The relay picked up my live stream as I cleared the first layer of thin air. The burn was clean. The harness pressed my chest against the seat, but not hard. The engine throttled as planned. I watched my hands on the console to keep my mind in the room with me. Ramos's voice came to me in the crackle of interplanetary etiquette. "Copy assent. We have your vector. Good work. We are with you." Then a pause that made me think of a man with a hand over the mic looking at others in a room. "We will come back. Not you, not alone. We will come back." He had the tone people use when someone is walking away from a grave. He did not tell me I did the right thing. He did not need to. In orbit, I stowed the samples with a care that felt ceremonial. I logged the exact moment I sealed each case. I wrote out the structure of the unknown gas and the non-structure of it. I wrote the words "cannot classify" and let them stand. I added a simple line at the end. Door present, door responded, door sealed. It was a small sentence. It carried weight in my head. Sleep in orbit is just distance. The planet turned under me with a regularity that does not care about human choices. Sunlight cut the cabin and made the surfaces look clean. Shadow followed and made them look old. I shut my eyes and saw a corridor with a floor that held no dust. I opened my eyes and saw a suit helmet resting in a rack. I let the planet's slow spin count out the hours until the burn window to the return vehicle. When the burn came, I lit the engines and felt the machine settle into the line that would carry me to the next ship. The outpost dropped behind the horizon with a last flicker on the comm panel. The buffer still had the short, broken sentence from before I arrived. "We found a door. It answers. If anyone hears this..." I did not finish it in my head. Some words are complete even when they are broken. I wrote a final log as the stars steadied. Report complete. Outpost secured. Quadrant D site sealed. I recommend the next crew brings cutting tools, a laboratory that can speak to gases that do not fit our tables, and a plan to say goodbye at a place that might not be ours. I am coming home. I closed the recorder and let the engines work. On the last clear pass, I sent one more picture. It was the chessboard. White to move. I did not make the move. That belongs to someone who will stand in that room, feel the floor under real weight, and decide if the next piece goes forward or stays. The door waits under dust and clamps for that person. The planet keeps its own time. I looked out the window and saw a line of dawn cut across Arcadia. You cannot hear it, but you can see the work of a world in the way light changes. My hands were steady on the harness. The cabin air was thin, dry, well understood. The unknown sat in 2 sealed vials and in a corridor I had not entered. I let the silence be clean and full of facts. My suit lay folded beside me in its bag. The visor had a small scuff that would catch light just so. I thought of how Shu had sat down by the seam with a tilt that looked like a person planning to stand in a minute. Work does that to people. You think you will just rest and then do the next thing. Sometimes the next thing does not come. It is not drama. It is just the end of a sequence. Mission pinged with another message in a neutral font. Trajectory nominal. See you on the other side. It was exactly right. I watched the numbers tighten toward their targets. I checked every checklist again. I did not make promises aloud. I did not pray. I looked at the little scuff and at my hands and at the line where Mars touched space. The relay dropped under the horizon. The panel went quiet. The cabin hummed with life support and a fan that had a bearing not as smooth as the others. I timed the jitter and wrote it down. I watched the timer that would tell me when to stage. I waited like a person waits on a test they have studied for. The unknown sat where it was and would still be there after I slept on Earth. I closed my eyes and pictured the canopy and the clamps and the seam with its cautious line. I pictured a person in an EVA suit sitting in a corridor no one had walked before us. I pictured a chessboard that would wait for a human hand. I pictured dust sliding along a ridge in a wind that will outlast every name we give to it. I opened my eyes and got ready to work the next steps, because that is what we have when the story is large and the tools are small.